our windows are boring. Extremely boring. And it doesn't have to be that way. In fact, not that long ago, it wasn't. Even blinds were really exciting at one point. No, I'm not kidding. I was genuinely shocked too. And maybe, just maybe, we can find inspiration in a few century-old styles. The sponsor for today's video is Saley. It's a world full of dusty, stained, and broken mini blinds. Even the expensive curtains are just the choice between linen and velvet in 5 shades of beige. How about window shades? You get vinyl. Even curtain rods are finished with ball or flatter ball. For something that takes up so much space in our lives and our homes, and that we interact with all of the time, you would think that there would be a plethora of options just beckoning us to buy them. But no. It certainly hasn't always been this way, but when did it change? And what did we lose along the way? I have 20 windows to cover in this house, not even counting the basement or doors. I was left with a few bamboo blinds coated in decades of dust and a strange pattern of holes on every window frame. Not that I expected anything better, it just reminded me of how much I personally despise bamboo blinds. They offer no privacy and only minor light blocking. Most of my old curtains were left behind because the Nevada sun is absolutely brutal, and they were permanently endowed with window prints. I had to start over, but I realized the last thing I wanted to do was buy 20 of the same curtain rod and fill each room with boring, straight, bland curtains, which would still cost a fortune to do, by the way. I figured there had to be a better answer. So on to the vintage catalogs and magazines to see what ideas they had hidden away. Of course, the styles changed throughout the 20th century, but there are some very consistent options. And consistent hardware that's still actually being sold today. Most of the catalogs for various window products focus on the window shape and how to work with it, which of course drives style changes. In the 1920s, there were smaller, heavily framed windows, like mine. By the 1940s, they're tackling larger options that run floor to ceiling or around corners. The 1960s, on the other hand, loved short and wide windows. Add in bay windows, French doors, and other complex styles, and there's an ever-evolving house of challenges. One thing is consistent, however: layering. 2, 3, even 4 pieces that fit on top of each other to create visual interest and function. There are different purposes for every option, and that's why one alone rarely does it. No plain and boring windows for them. Rather than travel through the decades for what honestly has a ton of overlap, I'm going to break it down by type. But first, speaking of travel, I want to introduce the sponsor for today's video, Saley. I was just on a cruise, and every time I stepped off the ship in a new place, my phone pinged with a list of rolls and roaming costs. The last thing I want to be doing on a trip is wandering around trying to find Wi-Fi just to answer a text without incurring charges. I've got a couple of international trips coming up soon, and I know I need to plan ahead. And that's where Saley comes in. They offer simple eSIM plans that can cover you in over 200 locations. Even if you're going from place to place, you won't have to keep dealing with buying and changing out complex and fiddly chips and plans. All you have to do is download the Saley app, purchase whatever plan works best for you, and install it on the app. Then, once you land in your new location, it will automatically turn on and keep you connected. There's even an ad blocker built in to avoid that nonsense eating up your data. So, be sure to make Saley part of your packing list on your next trip. Get an exclusive 15% discount on Saley data plans. Use code Nicole Rudolph at checkout and download the Saley app, or go to saley.com/Nicole Rudolph. Thanks again to Saley for sponsoring today's video. So let's start with the base layer of blinds, because that's the one thing I admit I won't be doing in this house. Even just the old style of wood slat blinds with the fabric tape holding them together is surprisingly modern. It only really picked up as an option at the end of the 18th century, but took a little while longer to have adjustable angles figured out. Now, there were plenty of variations around the world with different materials dating further back, but this is the version we can still find today. Even the term Venetian blinds seems to only be applied because they were popular there first in terms of European use. Their actual origins are likely Persia, Japan, China, or even may have evolved out of ancient Egyptian styles. Point is, blinds just weren't the standard window covering of choice here prior to that, as draperies and shutters were perfectly functional. Even after their introduction, usage was limited for the same reason it is today. They're far more expensive and difficult to clean compared to cotton curtains. In photographs from the 19th century, whether of an expensive large house or a small tenement, blinds just aren't that common. And for the same reason, I'm not dealing with them now. Regular dips into the bathtub for cleaning is faster than wiping down each slat, but at some point the sun takes its toll on both the wood and the fabric tapes. They did have a bit of a revival around the turn of the 20th century, as it was increasingly trendy to have colonial styles in your home, and people were looking for something that felt different after decades of extensive draperies. By this time, fabrics and paints were a little more sun resistant, so long-term protection of Venetian blinds was a little easier, and increasing mass production had made them a little cheaper and achievable, like most things. Apparently, they were far more popular in office buildings and banks than homes, however, until the 1940s. They popped up in quite a few model homes at the World's Fair in Chicago, and we were about to add in some dramatic new technologies and materials to make them practical. This is where we begin our descent into mini blinds. Replacing the wood slats with aluminum supposedly solved the majority of long-term wear problems. They were resistant to sun, rain, easier to wipe clean, and most importantly, they would be made in a vast rainbow of fashionable colors without the problems of regular paint. Catalogs show not only choices in color, texture, and even print for the slats, but they came with contrasting tape colors as well. Once plastic took off mid-century, a few companies figured out a way to slide your own fabric or wallpaper into the slats to pattern drench like never before. They advertised these as incredibly durable, easy care, and highly fashionable. It's basically the same stuff that measuring tapes are made out of, so it does make sense that it feels sturdy. It's just that, like all new material advancements like this, it may take a couple of decades to really see the actual lifespan. Eventually, they wear down and break. Granted, there were tons of extra little advancements along the way to make them even easier to deal with. The mini portion started with slimming down the slats in the 1960s, especially helpful with shallower modern window designs. Plastic tapes or string instead of cotton were easier to clean and didn't fade. Removable slats for cleaning, two-part blinds that let you angle only one half open at a time, brackets to hold them in place with an open window breeze, even heated or sun-sensing options were put forward as possibilities. Essentially, blinds were the window covering of the future. One of the next ideas to advance blinds was to place the slats vertically to avoid dust completely, another result of the post-war idea boom around 1950. They were quickly available in department stores at the same range of colors and patterns as horizontal options. Some slats were rigid, while others were soft enough to be pulled back like draperies. Other notable variations include these woven blinds, which don't rotate, but have thin slats with colorful cords woven along the length. They seem to have been extremely trendy in the late 1960s and 1970s. Definitely an interesting DIY option and yet another way to introduce color. In the late 1970s, there was another surge of colorful mini blinds as well. Honestly, if it weren't for the beige trend picking up around the late 1980s, more on that if you want to understand how everything became beige here, we probably would still have fun blinds. Just like all things, though, it's easier for companies to sell a small range of colors that they know will market well. Though I can see an entire business of Technicolor blinds doing weirdly well right now. Feel free to take that idea or maybe just spray paint your own. Blinds were by no means the only or even main window covering option. Shades, whether roller, Roman, or shirred, were everywhere. Since not all draperies were meant to close or be heavy enough to block out the sun, we'll get to that next, something else had to be present: Roller shades seem to be the most common. Even by the 1920s, they were spring-loaded, so having a pull cord was optional. This is one of the styles that I still have evidence of all over my house. These little brackets are exactly the same as modern ones you can still get, and there's holes for them in nearly every window frame. In fact, I did manage to find these same brackets brand new. I'm going to be doing roller shades in my bedroom and possibly other windows eventually. The catalogs for the hardware show both wood and tin as options for the roller, though I went with modern cardboard so I could cut it to size more easily. Inside is a tightly wound spring, which needs to be adjusted for your window size. One bracket simply holds the end of the roller, and the other has a flat opening to keep the spring stable. These usually fit inside the window frame, close to the glass, but external is an option as well. There were even ads for rails to help guide the shades, which I feel like is less a matter of pulling it down straight and more a matter of keeping it from flopping about if the window is open and there's a good breeze. Variations from there included placing the roller at the bottom of the window and pulling up with the cord, which sounds like a great solution for bathrooms or privacy, placing rollers in the middle so the upper and lower portions are covered separately, presumably for tall windows or very specifically blocking out direct sunlight. Today, these are almost always vinyl or vinyl backed. Earlier styles, most typically cotton, were also waterproofed to some extent by way of boiled linseed oil. There were a few other chemical options, like those that they termed watercolor, but they all had the purpose of making the blind more impervious to light and resistant to water if the window was left open in the rain. Since I'm not concerned about rain, I'm just going to need to pick a fabric that coordinates with the drapery styles and a backing that is stiff enough and will block light. Other fabrics do show up, like plissé or holland linen, so it's not all plain options. They do mention adding a crinoline or other light buckram stiffening layer if using a lighter weight silk for draperies, so that's another option to keep this stable enough. A metal rod or rib sewn into the base and some sort of pull is also needed. Maybe some fringe if you're feeling fancy. Genuinely, this feels like a game changer to me because I don't have to worry about whether drapes are too sheer, even with direct sunlight. And unlike the modern roller shades that are usually extremely bulky on top and meant to be used alone, this just tucks them away behind everything else when not in use. And I get to custom make these at a price less than I would spend to get a not-so-great vinyl one instead. Shades raised by way of gathering or pleating are also in so many examples. Roman shades today refers to the pleated ones, though I didn't find that term commonly employed in catalogs until around the 1960s. Any range of shirred, gathered, drawstring, or pleated seems to be used instead. I'm not doing any super sheer shades that can be easily gathered up, but I am doing a few pleated ones. The window at the top of the stairs needs to be covered since the sun comes directly in, and has been bleaching out this poor banister. I can't do drapes because there's not enough room with how the handrail ends, so keeping it tucked away with a pleated shade that will almost never be raised seems the least intrusive. Same thing with the sunroom, which I've now determined is actually going to be the sewing room too, so that's something happening soon. I have so many windows in there, and I need to be able to control direct sunlight. There's not a specific technical reason to go with pleated over roller in these windows, just a variation of the style. I do think it works better if you have a heavy fabric or trim on the edges, though, but that's just not an experienced opinion. The hardware for these hasn't changed much either. The only thing I found significantly different was that the cord catchers now have an option for a locking mechanism. That seems to come into play by the 1930s, though the little cord tie-offs are still pretty common even in my 1940s window frames. The cord, rings on the back, and other features are pretty standard. There are quicker no-sew and little-sew versions with the tapes to stick onto the back today. What I did decide for both, however, is to cover the top with a valance. This is sort of the ultimate hide all the problems option. While it does give me flashbacks to excessive floral ruffles of the 1990s, there are so many styles. Yes, ruffles of every shape and size, but also geometric, swags, pleated, and even wood cornices. I'm going to keep these a bit more plain with shaped edges and ribbon trim rather than fluffy and ruffly. Before we get too far into the final crown of the window, we should explore the massive range of curtains along with it, and hardware. For this, I actually have a range of Kirsch catalogs from the 1920s through the 1970s, a window hardware brand that is still selling a lot of the same stuff today. Seriously, they didn't just sell curtain rods, but had lengthy books full of color pictures to show what the latest trends in window stylings were. There are two types of coverings seen throughout: curtains and draperies. Yes, there is actually a defined difference. I didn't know that. They refer to the sheer layer as curtains and the heavier outer fabric as draperies. How they hang, what they're made from, and what they're trimmed with changes subtly throughout the decades, but there are a lot of similar ideas. I started with the 1920s because of my window frames. Heavy and mid-sized, they're the closest to what was fashionable then. The curtains they suggest are net, voile, gauze, lace, and anything that provides light filtration. Some are floor length, always 1 inch above the floor or just above the baseboard, they say, while others end just below the windowsill. Plain hem, fringe, embroidery, and even printed designs finish off the bottom. I have also been adding these to more of my windows as I discover which way the direct sunlight invades throughout the seasons. The plan is to add a short one just hitting the sill inside each of the living room windows to protect the darker wool draperies and my furniture. I can still see out. It's not totally blocking the lovely window frames or the view. The main bedroom is going to have full-length panels of the same plain silk and wool twill. These sheer curtains are also the go-to for covering door windows gathered up on either end to hold them into place. Layering on top of this are the draperies, often pulled back or swagged to either side. Heavier fabrics like damask, cretonne, striped silk madras, velour, and satin would help block out the light if they're pulled closed, or rather, if they can be. A lot of the designs are clearly meant for the draperies to only be a frame, sometimes a heavily trimmed one, though I do feel like this article on chintz, printed cotton, trimmed draperies is very modern. The shades and the blinds were then meant to handle the actual light problems. Now, granted, all of these options can be lined up on separate rods to make full movement possible. Even today, the Kirsch triple rod option still exists. So you don't have to pick one or the other, even if you can't layer three different supports. Other creative rod styles really take off by the 1930s catalog. The entire back half is just incredibly ornate, colorful, and strangely shaped rods like nothing we have seen today. Wood options are multicolor, stippled, and decoratively carved. Some of the metal options have additional centerpieces to tie into the ends. Others are short, pivoting rods that are meant to hold those decorative draperies out to the side. They do extend just a little further, but clearly aren't meant to overlap in the middle. While these are no longer produced, there are so many antiques floating around. Most seem to be missing their bracket, but that's not the difficult part to figure out. I ended up with a fairly large set that needs some love. They seem to have a gold or brass finish originally, and I'm going to be taking them back to that. Kirsch mentions that theirs are cast aluminum, which is lightweight and fairly durable. A lot of these also have matching holdback options. This set has some that I don't think originally matched, and I'm still not sure if I'll use these or try to find others. But just as quickly as these decorative options arrived in the catalogs, they disappeared. The 1940s catalog is nearly devoid of all of these fancy options with only a few draped in vines towards the back. Both curtains and draperies have lost their elaborate details and deflated to straight lines. There are more and more synthetics, uses of plain fabrics, occasionally mixed with prints, but a lot less large textured woven patterns. There's still a dusting of pom-pom and tasseled edges, but even the valances have simplified down to well-organized swags. They make a pleating holder for that, by the way. Part of the reason for this is that windows are getting larger and larger, taking up entire wall spaces. The fussy and elaborate styles of the previous decade would be a lot, and too much by the standards of simplicity and hygiene that so many homes were focused on around post-war. The 1950s doesn't change this trajectory. Ruffles do make a little bit of a comeback, but shorter and lighter. Cafe curtains taking up half the height of the window are also everywhere. This is one style I'm using in the kitchen and bathroom. I can see that there were cafe rods hung in all of those windows at some point. Light is still needed, but so is privacy, and a washable option that won't yellow with grease is a good idea. This is also the point where the catalogs start switching towards window shapes deciding style. Not just how to fix the odd curved window problem, but splitting it up by regular window shape. There's just too many styles and they don't all play nicely. Windows that are short or tall, in the corner, spread across the wall, or bowed out. But just in case you worry it's too logical and not nearly fashionable enough, there's this fun color guide in the back. By the 1960s, they've clearly acknowledged there are too many window shapes and types in the common home, and that first pages are just listing the variety. Each section walks the reader through how to handle the window shape with various styles. Nothing about these simple line drawings really screams 1960s, nor does it give a universal sense of trends. But the colors and fabric selection is a different story. Draperies are simple in shape, but chaos in fabric here. Massive floral prints, complex geometrics, layering of different patterns and textures. The colors alone make it pretty hard to ignore what era it is. Even though there does seem to be a minor return of valances in the 1970s, it continues to remain simple. Curtains are seen less and less. Blinds, or just draperies alone, are increasingly common. But when you note the busy wallpaper and fabric prints, it's no wonder. It also helps to answer why windows are so boring today. We streamlined our draperies to balance wild prints, but didn't return to the more creative ideas when solid color fabrics came back. Like I mentioned, there was a brief resurgence of what was considered Victorian style in the 1990s, but it was really more 1940s does 1880s. Lots of large designs, extra trim, ruffles and pleats. Yes, all of those trims and quite a few flashy fabrics are still available in stores that cater to custom interior design. But unless you can make them yourself or have the finances for custom, we're usually stuck with some very bland options. Add in that we don't have exciting window frames or decorative window panes, and it's even more blah. So maybe check out the supplies links below, grab a few tassels, and see what you can make up. I'll be working on these for the next few months as each room gets painted and cleaned, so stick around to see all of the finished works. Oh, and don't forget to follow the link and add Saley to your next trip.